Softball fanatics. I'm so excited to be back in the studio with you. I am holding the fort down here all by myself in Austin, Texas, here in the studio at Flow Sports. But we have a great show. We have Ches, Allie, and we have a guest on the show today. Super excited to have them all joining us. But first and most importantly, Ches had quite the weekend this weekend, and I feel like we need to hear from her.
I don't know if I would say it
She
was
did a good
quite
deed.
the weekend.
She's a good deed of the
Yes,
coronavirus.
I would. Yes, and it happened on Easter. Okay, quick story, y'all. It's a
Story
feel
time
good
with
one.
Ches.
So
Story time with Ches. I feel like this could be a segment. I feel like this could be a new segment.
yeah, so I realized that there's a nature reserve that I live close by, and I went for a walk yesterday because it was nice, and I came across this bird with an injured wing. And I went on my hike and then I came back and it was still there, obviously, because it wasn't going anywhere. And I took it in. So I rescued it. And I grabbed some like foliage and put it in a little box. And I actually had gloves with me. So I was able to pick it up and then carefully and then put it in this little cardboard cardboard box container. Sorry, having trouble here. And it was like super scared. And so I started doing some research online, like what to do if you find a bird with a broken wing, right? The things you find on Google. Well, it said you should put it in a box and keep it warm. So it was actually in my apartment, and I I covered it, and it was safe. And then in the morning, it was like we were like it finally felt safe, and we were like talking to each other. I was like, "You doing all right over there?" And then it would like chirp at me, and I was like, "Holy crap, this bird's talking back to me!" So I just kept talking, and then it would chirp back. I was like, "This is amazing. This just made my day." So that's my feel good Easter story. I took it to the wildlife rescue. They're going to rehabilitate it, hopefully, and hopefully that little guy can fly back in the wild.
I mean, what have you guys been doing during your coronavirus quarantine besides binge watching Flow Softball? Ches is out there saving birds. Like,
I feel like there's this theme music in the background, birds.
Exactly. That's why we have you on the show today.
Oh boy, yep. But on the show today, we have Robbie Wilson from NSR, and we're so happy to have him. Just bringing a wealth of knowledge. And Robbie, I don't know you, but we've been getting tons of questions around the eligibility extension, how it affects every recruiting class, how it affects teams, how it affects fifth and sixth year seniors, first year freshmen. So all kinds of questions. And just want to thank you for joining us on the show and talk a little bit about your background.
I appreciate y'all having me. It's kind of like we were talking about, just a few days ago. This, and I guess I'll start with my background. Obviously, I'm a regional director at College Softball Scouting with National Scouting Report. We do obviously have scouting, other stuff, but softball is my forte, and so, um, you know, among my time playing college softball and or college baseball, I didn't play college softball, college baseball. Um, then my time in strength and conditioning, I ended up spending time in softball, and obviously, and hopefully don't turn any fans off. But once you watch softball, baseball puts you to sleep, and so didn't go back. And once been doing this for a little over 7 years, close to 8 years now, and obviously NSR been around for 40 years. But like I said, I was talking about it just a couple of days ago. The biggest key to a lot of this stuff is that there is no golden answer just yet. Everything is almost kind of hypotheticals of it's similar to the Division One rules changing a couple of years ago. This is what happened, and we know kind of some of the stipulations, and there's a lot of assumptions on how things could transpire, but there's still a lot of other stuff that needs to take place before certain pathways are decided. You can kind of, my job as with NSR, a big piece to my job is to, lack of a better reference, keep my ear to the ground. And not just talking to all the different college softball coaches from coast to coast and different divisions and stuff. And it's not just talking about my prospects or anything. It's getting a feel for what they're thinking. And then also, this person heard something that they weren't supposed to know about. And then this person heard something that they weren't supposed to know about. And lack of a better reference, ultimately putting it all together and kind of figuring out, and this is probably what's going to take place, but these are the other couple of pathways that could take place. And if those do, what's going to be the best pathway for recruiting? And this, out of all of my years of doing this, there have been things that have changed. And up until now, I would say those Division I rules changes a couple of years ago, would have been one of the bigger things, at least in my time of scouting. But, again, I know y'all are going to say it several times too. I think what everybody has to remember is yes, this is the biggest thing that I can remember in memory. But it's not just uncharted waters for the players. It's uncharted waters for the college softball coaches. Almost every single one of them, they don't necessarily express frustration to me. They express, worry about what it could mean. And not just in the next 2 months or 6 months or the next year. They worry about the implications long term. And so long story short to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the, I know, based on our call, a lot of the worry came from the incoming classes and whether or not that money was there for those committed. And for those uncommitted, are there going to be any spots available? Because they could potentially be taken up by fifth or sixth year seniors. So a lot of different scenarios. And then you have the scenario with a Wisconsin or Ivy League, where if you are being recruited by them, you're not going to have to face any of those potential worries that you would if you were to go to a school that is fully enforcing the waiver and eligibility extension.
Yeah, no, I'm a little surprised we haven't had, aside from Ivy League stepping out, and that there were people that were irritated by that, but it didn't surprise anybody. That was kind of something we expected. The Wisconsin was something we did not expect. I get the statement from it, and obviously, to be honest, I'm a little surprised we haven't seen a couple more, because there were a few that expressed to me that they had kind of heard the same thing from their ADs, and we haven't seen it transpire just yet. And so I'm a little surprised we haven't heard anybody else step out just yet. All together collectively is going to be kind of like we talked about before, those. I've had a few of my 2020s, for example, the seniors that they were committed, they had signed their NLI. And because of the COVID-19 and because of all of a sudden having to stay at home and everything else, they filed to, get a release from their NLI, which is, normally like pulling teeth, and boom, a little over 24 hours later, they get the answer, yes, here's your full release, and so part of it ended up being not just because of, the schools being farther away, but yes, if you're a 20 that has signed, obviously the school is still going to give you your funding, but, you're a 2020 center fielder and, you were supposed to be coming in with, 3 or 4 girls in front of you that you were going to have to compete with. And now all of a sudden with having that extra year, now all of a sudden you've got 5, 6, maybe more that you're having to compete in front of. And it's no offense to any of the incoming freshmen at all, but when it comes to putting a roster together, naturally, 9 times out of 10, yes, your freshmen are going to be more hungry for a roster spot and playing time, but you're putting a 22-year-old against an 18-year-old, and so, just naturally, if you have all of those girls coming back, your freshmen are more often than not going to end up being asked to redshirt, if anything. And so, the other side to it is those coaches that have had girls that, they got into medical school or they got into nursing school or they got that other internship and they are going somewhere else and not returning. the transfer portal has, it had its bloop, and then it stayed, and then it filled up again, and now it's kind of stayed. I think it'll happen again this week as coaches are still trying to finish their exit meetings after they got permission to be able to do their exit meetings, via Skype and Zoom and everything else. They're still finishing their exit meetings and being able to determine who is and who is not staying. And so the hard thing about some of those other ones entering the transfer portal is they can have discussions with coaches, and they can, have the, virtual tour, I guess you'd say, and all that stuff. But a bunch of them have said, hey, I like this kid, probably going to move forward with her, but I'm going to wait the next 2 to 3 weeks and see what all pops up in the transfer portal before I start making decisions. And so a lot of those kids who
money scares.
Yeah. And so, and I don't know if y'all have heard anything different, but that's what I've, from my side of it, dealing with the prospect and then dealing with the college coach. That's what I've seen a lot of, is no matter how much they like the kid, they're not ready to pull the trigger because all of a sudden, they're concerned. And again, it becomes a situation of whether it's now or whether it's 2 or 3 weeks from now, there's still a possibility that you turn around and commit this kid, and then all of a sudden the golden child enters the transfer portal the next day. And so, I feel for those kids. I feel for those coaches having to make those decisions without being able to, without being able to do what they need to do.
There's a good question, Robbie, on Facebook. Manuel says, so with the program rejecting seniors returning for another year, can those seniors use that extra year to transfer using the transfer portal?
Yes. The hard thing about the kids, and that's across the board, if something happens in this week, we start to see more schools that jump up and say, hey, we're not going to honor the extra year of eligibility thing. If they all of a sudden jump in and do that, the kids at that school can, in theory, not, hopefully it doesn't happen, but the whole team at Wisconsin could turn around and leave, if that's the case. But the downside to it is when if they stay, the current school that they're at isn't going to count against their equivalency. But when they turn around and enter the transfer portal and go to another school, so that's another thing that I've heard from a bunch of coaches is, we know that inevitably if I lose 2 of my 5 seniors, I can't turn around and replace them with a freshman or even a first-year JUCO kid. Most likely I've got to get an upperclassman that's in the transfer portal if I can. You got to replace a 22-year-old with a 22-year-old, not an 18-year-old. The experience, the maturity, the leadership. And so the hard thing to answer the question is, yes, he can turn, or she can turn around and leave and go to another school. But as of right now, the coach is going to be so much more hesitant to make that move because that kid transferring in is going to count against that coach's equivalency.
You mentioned something interesting when we first started the show. You're like, this is going to have long-term effects, and there are a lot of things that need to fall into place before we even know what pathway we're going to be on. So it sounds like the transfer portal is one of them. It sounds like for the next at least a couple weeks, the transfer portal is going to be all over the place. I'm wondering what other things need to fall into place before we have at least a couple clearly defined pathways moving forward.
I think that's the one big piece. I think the first big piece is coaches finishing their exit meetings. That's going to determine a whole lot. And what a lot of other people are, and me and Chess were talking about this just a couple of days ago, when the extra year of eligibility and honoring the scholarships and stuff came about, basically it was freshmen, sophomore, juniors. Y'all are going to get the money that y'all were offered the year before. Seniors, you'll get the extra year of eligibility, but it's left up to the coach as to whether you have 0 up to the scholarship number that you had been offered. And so, long story short to it, those freshmen, sophomore, and juniors, yes, technically the coach has to honor it, but what I am seeing, and like me and Tess talked about, I'm not saying any kids' names, any schools' names, anything. There's a lot of them that aren't mine, and there's a lot of the coaches that have, told me in confidence, but what's happening is if I'm the coach at ABC University, and hopefully there's not really an ABC University, if there is, I apologize, but I'm the coach at ABC University, and there's this kid who, was a stud, a big fish in a small pond that came in, and I did everything I could, but it just is not on the same wavelength as the rest of my team. in her exit meeting, I can very politely tell her, hey, I'm just going to be honest with you. You're probably not going to sniff the grass. Besides practice, you're going to probably not dress out and this, that, and the other. So if you do want to leave, by all means, I'll make sure that you get a full release and everything else. You're seeing that polite nudge to be able to free up the space on their roster for those kids that did, or it's a kid that came in that had a few different injuries, and she came in as this with high expectations, and then a couple of injuries, and she just has not developed back into what she was prior to the injuries. And so and that's what I meant the other day. Whenever, like I've told everybody else, yes, this stuff it's a little crazy, but it's not as bad as everybody thinks it's going to be. Yes, there's going to be tighter roster space, but there's also going to be a school in the same conference that all of a sudden has these openings. And so while this school may fill up, this school is going to all of a sudden have openings. And so I think the first part is the coaches finishing their exit meetings. The second piece, exactly like you said, it's figuring out who is and is not in the transfer portal and what options the coaches have. And then I think the next piece, inevitably, if it's not the next piece, it's the piece after that, is going to be not knowing exactly where college football is going to land with all this. It is literally causing more speculation and hypothesis out there than I've ever seen before. And I read a good piece earlier this morning where they talked about, people were talking about how it's a possibility that it may be on track and everything. And then the guy said, do you really think August 31st that Notre Dame and Navy are going to go play each other over in Ireland? There's also, there's a large number of schools talking about not even having their students come back on campus in the fall. And so there's a lot of stuff up in the air when it comes to a lot of that. And truthfully, I don't think we're going to know any of that by the end of May. I think by the end of May, we have the expectations for the next couple of months, but we're not going to know everything.
Mm-hmm. I want to touch on something that we really haven't discussed, and we've brought up transfers a number of times on the show. What's your best advice to players entering the portal and kind of navigating the waters of being a transfer?
Talking to me?
Yes, you.
Yeah, the first part. The first part is obviously be active. Be active. Don't enter the transfer portal and assume because of some of the stuff that you've heard out in the general public that there's going to be a feeding frenzy on you. I've seen complete studs enter the transfer portal and organically not hear anything from anybody for a week, and they're like, "Is something wrong? Are you sure I'm in the portal?" And don't automatically assume that it's going to be a feeding frenzy. And don't be reactive, be proactive. As soon as you get the green light that you are officially in the transfer portal and you're ready to go, do not hesitate. I cannot fathom, I can't think of a single college coach in the country that's going to be offended by a kid sending them an email saying, "Hey, I'm a transfer. I just entered the transfer portal. You can check. I'm interested in your program." What's the worst he could say? "I don't have a need for you," or "Hey, you can't play for me." Wash your hands of it and you move on to the next school. So the first piece would be proactive, not reactive. The second piece would be patient. Do not expect that you enter the transfer portal today and that you have some stuff figured out by the end of this week and you know where you're going next week. If you can be patient, if everything stays on the same timeline as it has been before, I've had kids enter the transfer portal at the end of this season and not make decisions until the first week, the first week of classes at the new school. And so, in theory, unless there's a new last date to transfer that's popped up, you take your time. If you think about it, what is it, May 13th or April 13th? You've got plenty of time. You've got at least a month and a half. Yeah, exactly. And that's why I had to actually ask. That would be the final piece, is be patient. I guess if there's an addendum to it, or I guess an additional piece to it, don't be afraid to ask for help. don't be afraid to ask for help. If the old travel coach that you used to have, or an instructor that you used to have, whoever it is, whatever your resources were that got you to where you are now, use those resources now.
Absolutely. Thank you, Robbie. I think it's super important.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I kind of feel like we all need to be talking about this because people need to plan. I mean, this affects club, college, graduating seniors, but you kind of already alluded to it. If there is no college football, all of this discussion might just be for naught, because that would be a huge atomic bomb in the landscape of all of college athletics that there are discussions about right now, but we're all talking about if the normal right now that we have with COVID kind of ends in it. But like, college football is a huge piece of this. And there's an article on FloSoftball and a lot of the other Flo sports, Flo wrestling, Flo volleyball, Flo gymnastics, talking about just how big of a piece that is. Robbie, you want to talk a little bit about the implications that just college football has on what could happen with softball?
Y'all touched on it a little bit last week, and it's like I told Chaz, y'all hit a home run with explaining it. Like, what a lot of people don't understand is they think that it's just that football is getting preferential treatment. And by all means, obviously I am very much biased towards this singular sport. It is not people being biased towards football. A lot of people don't understand that even at your most powerful college softball programs, they know ahead of time that they are annually going to lose money. They know that, and not saying any names, but probably I would venture to say right now one of the top 3, top 5 most popular coaches in college softball at one of the wealthiest programs there is. He said his goal one day is to make $1. So they know they're going to be in the red. The goal each year is to lose the least amount of money possible. And what people don't understand is where's the funding coming from? It's coming from football. There's a couple of other sports that jump over the line every once in a while and jump into the green, but it's not just that they fund softball. They fund a whole bunch of other things. And so football not taking place. We talked about the budgetary or monetary issues with having 5 years worth of kids on the roster as opposed to 4 years, where now a bunch of your coaches are talking about, we're not going to be going and traveling to Mexico and traveling to here and there to go play these tournaments. We're going to be playing more local, trying to watch our budget. We're going to be holding more camps, not only so we're not traveling as much, but so that we're actually having, revenue come in, but also, like I say, y'all touched on this piece last week, that a bunch of, call it materialistic if you will, but the facilities, the fields, everything else, those are huge pieces in girls making their decisions on where they're going. And now, pretty much over the course of the next probably 2 or 3, if not a little bit longer, you're not going to see schools have huge softball facilities go up and new stadiums and all this other stuff. And you're pretty much the ones that got it done this last year before COVID-19 hit. They're extremely fortunate that they did get it done. And so the long story short to it is the monetary concerns that are going to take place. The thing that I haven't seen addressed on any of the shows, even any of the calls that have been on any of the articles, is inevitably, if football does have a shift, it is going to dictate a huge shift in the rest of the sports. And so if they do push football back, what a lot of people are talking about is the fact that they're for sure not going to be able to practice or be together. And, now you have and they haven't set a percentage, but an overwhelming number of athletic directors saying that they're not bringing their students back in the fall. Well, that also means now they're not going to be practicing together and everything. I think there is a huge chance that they scrap, and this is my prediction. I haven't seen it written anywhere. I think there's a huge chance that they end up scrapping it, because they had originally talked about in the very beginning, when they didn't realize how large all the scale of this was, they had talked about moving college football up so that they could avoid that predicted second wave of COVID-19 late in the fall. Well, now we're talking about possibly shifting the entire fall. Football is not just going to decide timelines and everything, as we know, and most people don't give it the right to do. Is when things shift with football, it rightfully so has an effect on the rest of the sports.
Well said, Robbie. Lots to unpack there. And Sarah, do you have anything to add to that?
I like you said, well said, Robbie. I kind of mentioned as I asked the question, we can all kind of talk about what's happening now and what to do now. And, I think you gave some really great advice in terms of being patient, being active in the portal, like be proactive, use the resources that you've had that have gotten you to where you are right now. That's all good advice. But if college football gets blown up, all of that advice probably goes out the door, and I think you'd be safe to say that as well. It's uncharted territory right now, and with football, it adds another enormous piece that nobody really knows what to do with until we know what's going to happen with it.
I can tell you the funniest thing, and I don't even know if this is the platform, so y'all may never ask me on again if I end up explaining it this way. Naturally, I get home every day. I get back, and I stayed home. Let's say I stayed home, and I'm discussing it with my wife, and her comparison is, she said, "Yeah, it's kind of like The Walking Dead. You know that they're going to attack, but you don't know when they're going to attack and which way they can attack from. So the best possible thing is just to be ready for anything and everything." And at first, she totally lost me when she said The Walking Dead, and I'm like, and gave her a minute. But now you circle back around, it really is. It is, truthfully, and this is what we've done with anytime there's a monumental rule change, like the D1 rule change a couple of years ago, and now with this stuff. There are everybody knows that there's this way and this way and this way that it could possibly happen, where truthfully there is a grand scale of things that could happen. And if you go to social media and you start reading people's posts and you start reading their comments, and the problem is that a lot of people read a comment and they take it as fact, where there is a whole bunch of possibilities that have not come to fruition. And the only way, whether you are a kid in the recruiting process, whether you are a transfer, whether you are, like the college softball coaches have been saying, is the only way that you can get out of this without being too hurt from it is consider all possibilities and have a plan of action for each one of those possibilities should they happen, and then figure out what is actionable right now and what is not. Still have a plan, but if you're a kid that just entered the transfer portal right now, actionable is organize your stats from the last couple of years, figure out if your school streamed their games and whether or not you have permission to use your clips from those games. If not, maybe mom and dad film some stuff. If not, then it's time to get outside or go to the cage and start getting some clips. Inevitably, with the transfer kids, it's a little bit different than recruiting, than a high school recruit. With your transfer kids, the first thing that coaches ask about is their stats. What's their stats from the last couple of years? If you're a kid that didn't get much time and you don't have any stats or not very good stats, you can solve that by having video or going to get some video. And trust me, I've got a couple that are in the portal right now that they didn't have video. And, their school didn't stream stuff. And, I ended up having to basically outline what I needed them to go get. And it's not complicated. You prop your phone up and turn it sideways and video it, and coaches don't need it to be all spazzy and jazzy,
I like that.
I think this is what people come to. Here's the deal. Ches is talking about saving a baby bird. Robbie's talking about The Walking Dead, and then you have a whole bunch of information in between. That's what the people want. That's what they want to hear.
It's a good mix. Good mix of everything.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're watching and you didn't get the answer to your question, Robbie and I will be hosting another Zoom call this Thursday that you can join. It's limited to 100 people. So if you can, put your name in the hat, and then you'll be able to ask any question that you might have. And I'll put up the video from last Friday's meeting, which was really awesome. And you can ask all of either the coaches, the parents, or the grandparents, they found that information to be extremely valuable and helpful. And ultimately, that's what we want to provide for you guys, because we know that this is an unprecedented time, and all of us are searching for answers. And the best thing that we can do is come together and bring together the experts to share the information that we have with you guys, so you can make better plans moving forward. Robbie, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll see you on Thursday.
Awesome. Thank you guys for having me on.
Thanks, Robbie.
All right, Sarah, Allie.
Whew. There's a lot there.
A lot of information. That was awesome.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there,
There's
and
a
we're
lot
still
there.
we're still doing it. We're still going, guys. There's a number of universities that still haven't announced whether they're going to be using that waiver or not, which dictates a lot with either decision. So
A lot of
we're
good
gonna wait
resources
and
on the
see.
site. A lot of good resources on the site. The article about football and kind of what it means for Power 5 schools and what it means for schools that don't have football. It does a really great job breaking that down. We keep following up with new news as it breaks around the eligibility, and then Ches with her Zoom calls. A lot of information around eligibility, as well as just some new stuff coming. Like, we still got new stuff coming. Ches, what do we got?
Got
Coming
the
up.
Ches show this week. We have my BFF Megan Jo Willis in the house. We have a really
That's what we
fun
felt like.
conversation. Like I told you guys earlier, we have another Zoom call about the eligibility extension and how that impacts all the recruiting classes and 5th and 6th year seniors. So a lot of great stuff. And rankings next month. You guys are going to kill me with those, but they're coming. They're
And
cooking.
not to mention all the archives and rebroadcasts of your favorite softball. Download the FloSports app, get it up on your Roku or Apple TV, and just sit there and watch for hours. Hours and hours of softball you can watch.
Yeah, right now
On your
we're
couch.
rebroadcasting Mary Nutter, so you can re-watch that. And then we have FloSoftball 24/7 over the weekend. So you got all the softball you could ever want.
Bunch of Flow films. We have 48 hours worth of Flow films on our site right now. Softball films, wrestling. If you're a sports documentary buff, we got you taken care of.
Awesome. Well,